Good evening. I'd like to call tonight's the March 19th, 2015 Santa Barbara City Board of Harbor Commissioners meeting to order. Jeanette, would you call roll, please?
Yes, Bill Spicer.
Here.
Corey Bantolin. Betsy Kramer. Dennis Power. Helene Webb. Here. And Jim Sloan and Stephen McIntosh will not be present.
Very good. Mr. Reedman, any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, no changes this evening.
Very good. This is now the time for public comment on any topic that is not on tonight's agenda. I don't see any slips, so we'll move on to approval of the minutes.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second. We have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any nays? Passes unanimously. Mr. Reedman.
Well, good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. For the Director's report, just a brief report tonight. In terms of council actions, since we last met, the council waived the formal bid procedure as authorized in the municipal code, authorizing the General Services Manager to issue a purchase order to UCP Work Incorporated for the janitorial services they've been providing at the harbor for 22 years now. Due to increases in the minimum wage, they've had to increase their charges to us, and so that's what the council approved was a purchase order for not to exceed $291,000 in fiscal year 2016, and for fiscal year 2017, amount not to exceed $307,000 for their janitorial service. And we also increased the purchase order with Sentry Control Systems by $25,000 to a total of $109,500 for SCADATA parking revenue control equipment, specifically for Stearns Wharf. And this is the equipment that you see in the downtown parking lots. Specifically, what we added to this was, if you're familiar with the downtown lots, there's a column as you exit where you can put the ticket in, and it automatically reads it. And if you're under the time limit, the gate arm goes up automatically. If you're not, the charge appears on the screen, and that way it expedites it in terms of exiting the wharf. You can still also hand it to the kiosk will still be staffed, and you can still hand it to the staff person, but this is just a way of making the exiting the wharf more efficient. And tentative items for the April meeting is the Clean Marina report. And don't we have something else too? Oh, and then we have an item also on fishing areas, clarifying fishing areas on Stearns Wharf, what areas are off limits and what areas are permissible. We'll be bringing that forward as well. And that concludes my report.
Very good. Any questions for Mr. Reedman? Okay. Thank you, Scott. Mr. Bossy?
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Tonight I have 3 items to brief you on as part of this month's business services report. The first includes parking changes that you'll be seeing shortly out on Stearns Wharf. As Mr. Reedman alluded to briefly in his director's report, beginning next week, we will be installing new parking services infrastructure out on Stearns Wharf. This is phase 2 of our project. If you recall, last year we began phase 1, which was the Harbor Main parking lot as well as Los Baños, and it involves everything from new entry and exit columns, gate arms, as well as software and infrastructure to bring our infrastructure up to date. The system we currently have running out on Stearns Wharf as well as, well, only on Stearns Wharf now, is from 1995. It was handed down to us by Downtown Parking, which we were gracious enough to, we were happy that they did that. But those parts are no longer made. The manufacturer doesn't service them. So basically what we've been having to do for the last few years is cannibalize old equipment as it gets replaced and pull parts from old equipment that we have in storage. So beginning on March 23rd, which is Monday, they'll be installing new equipment out on Stearns Wharf, and they are supposed to be done by next Friday. So it should be a pretty smooth transition. We've got it all mapped out, and we've been meeting with the contractor on a regular basis. So that's the first change. And as Mr. Reedman discussed as well, we'll now have an exit column, which will help get people off the wharf a little bit quicker. And also the validation component, the second change out on Stearns Wharf is the elimination of the validation component of our 90-minute free parking. I want to stress that the 90-minute free parking is still in effect. It will still be in effect. The only difference is you don't have to be validated now. So it's similar to the 75-minute free parking in downtown. No validation is required. We're doing that for two reasons. One is the validation program is a bit antiquated. It's in our fee resolution. It actually requires people to purchase $5 worth of something out on the wharf, and then that particular business will stamp their card. Well, that's not readily enforced, and it kind of just ends up being stamped anyways. So that's one reason. And then the second reason is with the new system, if people were to stamp the tickets, and those will be inserted again into the ticket receiver on the exit or given to a staff member, eventually that ink starts to pull off, and it gets into the new equipment and could render the manufacturer's warranty null and void. So we want to start with a clean slate. We want this equipment to last another 10, 20, 30 years, however long. And so that's the second reason for that. Keeping the 90-minute parking, I think, is a good idea. It will continue to generate people coming on and off the wharf. And one thing is that I think this was set up many years ago when the wharf didn't have well over 1 million people coming out. And that's just the pedestrians. As you recall in some previous reports, last year we had over 1 million pedestrians. That doesn't include the cars, where we had about 252,000 cars entering Stearns Wharf. So we've got a lot of people out there. Businesses are doing great. Validation program is no longer needed. So that's the parking changes on Stearns Wharf. Next is an update on our request for proposal process at 117G Harbor Way, the former site of Transpac Marine. At last month's Harbor Commission meeting, the Harbor Commission accepted the recommendation of the request for proposal committee to direct staff to negotiate a lease with Michael Jansen Marine Services for that space. Since that time, Mr. Jansen has decided to withdraw from the negotiation process for personal and professional reasons, and we respect his decision and we wish him the best of luck. Staff currently plans on reissuing that RFP. We're going to change a few things in the RFP and release it likely next week. We'll give folks a little bit more time to respond to the RFP, and we will also advertise it to a wider market, including things like the log and some other opportunities we're pursuing as far as advertising. And we will keep you apprised of that process. And last but surely not least, for this month's business report is just my annual reminder that to our slip holders that we do have an automatic payment service for your slip fees. And currently we have about 39% of our slip holders on the automatic payment service. It's a great tool for people who travel a lot or simply don't want to be bothered with having to write out a check or come to the office. It's automatically deducted from your checking account, and we have applications in our office as well as you can download one on our website, and you can come in and we'll be happy to help you out and get you set up with that program. So that completes my business services report, and I'm happy to answer anybody's questions.
Commissioner Kramer.
Okay, I've got two questions, Brian, about the Stearns Wharf parking thing. I assume you've run this by the businesses and that they're happy with this.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, yes, we have briefed the Stearns Wharf businesses actually at last month's February's Stearns Wharf merchants meeting. And they were fine with it. There were a couple concerns just because it has been around for quite a bit. But I think they understand the reasoning and the fact that one of their big complaints is the backups on Stearns Wharf. I mean, sometimes on busy days, it'll be backed up all the way past the Harbor Restaurant. And we're hoping that this facilitates the exiting process. It's used in downtown. They've had a good deal of luck with it. And so we're confident that we're going to get a benefit out of that as well.
Okay, my other question has to do with wildlife. I haven't had a question of wildlife for a while. For the rescuers going out onto Stearns Wharf, we've usually been able to sort of flash a pass to the person at the gate and who then lets the person go out with a box to rescue the pelican or something like that. Will there be a way of doing that with this new system, taking a ticket and so forth?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, yes, we'll maintain the same processes for the most part. The only difference is where in the past, if you're a business owner and you do have a permit that allows you onto the wharf, you used to just be waved through. They'll have to pull a ticket, but it'll be dealt with on the way out. And that's just a way of, that's the revenue control side of things, making sure everyone who comes in and out is accounted for. And there are no freebies, if you will. We'll still give away those types of things and accommodate, service vehicles, obviously police, fire, things of that nature, city staff
Wildlife Care
deliveries, and Wildlife Care Network, and deliveries and things like that.
Okay.
So it'll be run the same way. The only change is that they'll have to pull a ticket, and that's it.
Great, thank you very much.
Commissioner Power.
My question is also about Stearns Wharf parking, and it's more for my information. And after the 90 minutes of free parking, are our fees comparable to the other parking lots, either on the waterfront or downtown?
Commissioner Spicer, Commissioner Power, they're a little different. After that 90 minutes, they're $2.50, whereas our other lots, there isn't a 90-minute free program. Our other lots are you come in, and we generally give about a 15-minute grace period in case you can't find parking or something along those lines. So it's $2.50, and it's actually required to be higher than our different waterfront lots through the permits with the rebuilding of Stearns Wharf. It's actually, again, required to be higher than the other lots. As far as downtown, you have a 75-minute free program, and I think it's I want to say $1 or $1.50 per hour. Yeah. Sorry, I haven't been downtown in a while.
The 250 is higher. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. Mr. Triberg.
Good evening, Chair Spicer and Commissioners. AIS Construction Company began dredging on Monday. A slight change from the last cycle, the fall cycle dredging, as they moved the discharge location opposite of the Cabrillo ball fields to kind of help nourish the beach down towards the Cabrillo bathhouse. And today, this morning even, it's remarkable how much sand is already on the beach. They've probably already removed roughly 1/3 of the contracted amount. It's where they start off is kind of the easy digging, and they've been very, very productive. Just to kind of demonstrate just how quickly the sand accumulates in the harbor over the winter months. This is the pre-dredge survey this last fall, probably sometime in November. This little clip of an image is when they were finished. About a month later, I removed 120,000 cubic yards. And here we are as of last Monday or Sunday. It's almost exactly the same as it was 2.5 months later. So that's 120,000 cubic yards worth of sediment deposited in the channel really quickly. I noted in my staff report that the Corps of Engineers had reduced the contracted amount from 150,000 to 120,000 cubic yards during the last contract. And although it's going to work out well for us this year because it was a pretty mild year, we didn't have that much sediment input, we're going to try and work with them to increase that amount for future years. It is below the average of 150,000 per cycle or 300,000 a year. Just so happens to work out this year, but it is a bit of concern, and these images kind of demonstrate just how quickly the channel can fill in. Another rather significant change is AIS Construction Company sold out their maritime division to a newly formed company called Pacific Dredge. Pacific Dredge is a subsidiary of Pacific Tug, who has provided tender services for...
Such a bad thing to run away from my mother, right into the arms of a lover. I should walk away from you in my brand new shoes. You know I'm just too young for the blues. I'm a baby and his kiss is so tender. I'm a big fool if I
begin working with Pacific Dredge. In the harbor, last Friday, we finished Phase 5 of the Marina 1 replacement project. That included J and K fingers. This was really remarkable on how quickly it was done. It was done in a total of 9 weeks compared to 13 weeks on Phase 4. Even this was 2 weeks ahead of schedule. We've got state-of-the-art docks, came in very, very quickly. And all the boats moved in right away, which is great because we have major impacts to transient berthing whenever we have these type of construction projects. It's really difficult to accommodate anybody coming through Santa Barbara. So with a 9-week construction window, it's much more tolerable, especially in the middle of winter. The project's going to resume with shop drawings submitted this summer for the city staff to review. Excuse me. And then they'll resume with Phase 6, which is H and I fingers, next winter, Phase 7 the following year, and Phase 8 the next year. As of this date, Phases 1 through 5 cost us about $7,890,000 with a corresponding debt service of about $480,000 per year. And I believe Brian's going to have a few more details on those during his budget presentation. I have a few images here to remind us why we're doing this project. These are a couple of photos I snapped today out on F Finger, which is a couple of years away. The way these docks are put together is the whales are, with the wooden whalers, are the structural members that hold the docks together, and they're lagged into the concrete. And you can see that concrete is spalling again. All of that has been repaired before. This work was the lion's share of the work that my staff had done over the years until we began this project. This is another problem on F Finger. Here's the pile guide falling away from the concrete. It's not like this everywhere, but this is kind of the progression of the deterioration of this type of docking system. We'll have to fix this. This can't last until 2017 when we fix it again. But the one reason why I mention it is we've been doing this project for a reason, and these docks just won't hold up any longer. They've long outlived their useful life, mainly because we've been so aggressive with maintenance. As we build out these docks, it does free up a lot of staff time. And with that staff time, we're able to concentrate on other parts of the marina, in particular, redecking marinas 2, 3, and 4. And I'm pleased to announce that we just finished redecking all of Marina 2. This was a really significant project that began in 2008 over on 4A. Then we went to 4B, C, D, all the way over, and it took us about a little over 5 years to replace all the finger docks. And these are just the docks between each of the two vessels that are berthed there. In 2014, we started on the main walks and finished those up just, I think it was last week, as a matter of fact. This has been a great project for us to work on. Our staff has become very efficient, and it's a very cost-effective means of replacing these different docking systems. Keep in mind, Marina 1 is all concrete, 2, 3, and 4 are all wood. Wood's an easy material to work with, and my staff has really kind of mastered the art of doing so. By way of comparison for project costs, it's about $35 a square foot for Marina 2. The total labor and materials was a little over $1 million, and it's not brand new all the way. We reuse some of the floats and some of the utilities, but it's very, very competitive. Previous jobs that are similar that we contracted out were on the order of $80 to a little over $100 a square foot. It's not quite an apples to oranges comparison. We have a more efficient means of launching docks and building docks than a typical contractor would. But by way of comparison, it's pretty efficient. We're pretty proud of what our staff has done. And just to put it into context, with the concrete dock, Marina 1, $180 a square foot. It's quite a bit less, but the concrete docks are very, very resilient. And Marina 1 it's almost 40 years old, so we'll get 40 years the life out of it. That concludes my report this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Treiberg? Mr. Power.
On the redecking project, does that include any dock boxes, electrical outlets, water, anything else, or has it really just strictly been limited to the decking?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Powers, we replaced dock boxes as a separate project. We've replaced all the dock boxes on Marinas 4 and 3. We're working back to Marina 2, so it is kind of a separate project. We replaced some of the utilities out to each finger, the water, the hose bibs, some of the electrical, but not the main feeds. So it's a little bit of both.
Commissioner Kramer.
Not a question, Carl, but just a comment. It's just an outstanding job. Just really congratulations to you.
Thank you very much.
You and your staff.
And I echo that, Carl. Thank you very much. Mr. Cronman.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Well, we had been quite free, Ponga free, if you will, for quite a while, but that all came to an abrupt end on February 16th when we received a call that a Ponga was under tow by a commercial fishing boat up in the Tehigas area, And so understanding that there was possibly contraband still on board and people possibly still on board, Harbor, per our SOPs and training, Patrol Boat 2 left port with the Santa Barbara Police Department with the appropriate equipment and with the ICE folks, Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement, and Harbor Patrol, and intercepted the boat actually off of Mesa Lane, where the commissioner fisherman had continued to maintain that he had maritime salvage rights and it was his boat and what have you. This isn't the first time we've seen this, and so we peacefully escorted the boat to the dock where it was explained to the gentleman that no, actually he didn't have salvage rights to this vessel that is part of an international maritime trade in narcotics and human smuggling. He still refused to give up the boat, and so he was gently escorted into handcuffs temporarily while the proper authorities could take the boat. It went out of the harbor on a trailer and is in storage somewhere in Southern California. And that was a cite and release. There was never any intention to take the fisherman to jail. We just needed to detach him from the boat so that the authorities could do what they needed to do with it. That being said, this is your typical Ponga. It's a 30-footer twin engine. There was no contraband found. There were no people found. Just the boat. And we're well connected with the various agencies who are on top of these kind of interdictions. We like not to get involved ourselves if we can't with Harbor Patrol, but we are always there to assist. And we have done so several times, but I'm happy to report that this incident ended peacefully and the Ponga is in storage where it should be in Southern California. And that concludes my brief report tonight from the Harbor Operations Division.
Any questions for Mr. Cronman? I have one. Did the local fisherman identify where he did take possession of the Ponga?
Mr. Chair, I believe it was up in the Tahigas area.
Okay. And he found it
It was
abandoned?
it was semi-awash in the sand, and he apparently got the water and sand out of it and took it under tow from that point. Apparently, it was freshly landed.
Understood. Thank you, Mick. I appreciate it. We will move on to item number 6.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, before I begin this item tonight, I wanted to introduce to you two colleagues from the City Attorney's Office who are here to join us for this discussion. One is the City Attorney, Ariel Colon. He will be representing your interests, the Commission's interests. And to my right, Ms. Sarah Connect, Assistant City Attorney, who will be representing staff's interests as we move forward in this discussion. And I believe, Mr. Colon, did you have a few words you wanted to say at the beginning?
Yes, thank you. Just very briefly, this is a hearing where there are due process rules that apply. And what that means is that your discretion is somewhat limited. You need to make findings based on the evidence you hear tonight and have read in the packet. And if you have any personal biases, you should identify those. If you have any personal connections with any of the parties to the proceeding, you should identify those. As we go forward, if you have specific questions about the law or the facts or the process, please direct them to me. Ms. Connect has been representing the department, and so we've erected what we call a due process screen. It's not appropriate to have the prosecutor, as it were, representing the judge, and you're in the shoes of a judge tonight. So with that, I turn it back to staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colon.
And does Jeanette read this?
I apologize. Go ahead, Jeanette.
Okay.
Item 6, appeal of termination of slip permit 4A21, Mr. Richard Smith. Recommendation that Harbor Commission consider Mr. Richard Smith's appeal of a slip permit termination for berth 4A21 in Santa Barbara Harbor, and A, uphold a termination, or B, uphold Mr. Smith's appeal. This item has been continued from February 19th, 2015.
Thank you, Jeanette. Mr. Chair and Commissioners, this appeal stems from the Waterfront Director's decision to terminate slip permit for a 4A21 in Santa Barbara Harbor. A notice of slip permit termination was sent to the permittee, Mr. Richard Smith, on December 2nd of 2014, And in turn, we received a written request for waiver of that termination by the waterfront director from the permittee's legal representative on the 12th of December 2014. The waterfront director subsequently denied the waiver request on the 12th of January 2015, and the slip permittee via his legal representative has thus appealed the waiver denial. They did that on the 21st of January, and the appeal was placed first on the February agenda for last month's hearing, but was continued to tonight and is being heard. So briefly about slip permits, so we're clear on what slip permits are. They're assigned to boaters berthing in Santa Barbara Harbor. They are a privilege. They're not a right. And they're issued for the purposes of recreational boating or commercial fishing. And they're not to be used for business or living aboard without appropriate permits issued by the departments. They're month-to-month licenses unless terminated by the waterfront director or the licensee, and they are governed by slip permit rules and regulations that are signed by the permittee prior to issuance of the permit. Specific laws and rules applicable to the matter at hand tonight include a slip permittee or his permittee's guest, visitor, or invitee's failure to comply with all applicable local, state, and federal laws, and all waterfront department rules and regulations may result in termination of the slip permit. This is in your packets, and it's also codified in the municipal code. The citation is here on the screen. Slip permits may not be loaned or subleased. This is in the Marina Rules and Regulations. That's number 17. The Marina Rules and Regulations in your packet are part of the slip permit issued and signed by the prospective permittee. Boat owners may stay aboard their vessel a maximum of 3 nights during any 7-day period, and to stay aboard for more nights than that, a live-aboard permit is required. This is again in the Rules and Regulations. It's also in the municipal code. And it's unlawful for any person to live aboard in Santa Barbara Harbor without having been issued a valid live-aboard permit by the waterfront director. No person shall engage in any business or commercial activity of any kind whatsoever in the harbor district, that's city waters, without first having applied for and obtained the appropriate license, lease, or permit. Again, that's from the municipal code. And at the discretion of the waterfront director, boats may be moved or reassigned as necessary. We did it during Carl's project that he just mentioned. It was a classic example. We relocated boats in an entire finger. We did the same thing the couple of months before that on K finger. That's also in the rules and regulations. That's number 7 in the rules and regulations. A marina berth. The city retains the right to reassign the permittee to another marina berth, as I just described, and to utilize the permittee's berth for other vessels when it is temporarily vacant. We do that all the time when people go to, cruising or go to the islands for a week or what have you. Number 8, the slip permittee agrees to abide by municipal ordinances relating to harbor use, posted rules and attached regulations, and any new regulations, policies, or ordinances that may be adopted. Again, that's in the slip permit. It's number 7 on the permit itself. So by way of background in the case before us tonight, Commissioners, in 2012, we became aware, staff that is, that permittees were renting their slips and vessels for vacation rentals, so-called botels, and ocean charters, typically via the popular vacation rental website, Airbnb.com. Well, we began seeing a trend in these and recognized the fact that they were a violation of both the slip permit rules and regulations that prohibit renting and the Santa Barbara Municipal Code prohibitions against living aboard or conducting business without permits. Our response, what we did was we undertook an outreach campaign. We had several discussions at the Harbor Commission 3 times. I believe those are captured between attachment 14 and 16 in your staff report. And in December 2013, I wrote an article in Dock Lines, again, which goes to all the slip permittees in the harbor, warning against this activity, reminding them not to do it, and that was widely distributed. And we also last year posted warnings on the marina gates, including the consequences, that is, slip permit termination for these types of activities. These are snapshots of the Dock Lines article. This is a snapshot photo of the warning that's been on the gates for months. And so we believe at the staff level, these notifications not only reflect our commitment to upholding the rules, regulations, and laws of the harbor, but they also are designed, they reflect our commitment to uphold the policy directives of the local coastal plan and the harbor master plan, both of which describe Santa Barbara Harbor as a working harbor with priorities for commercial fishing and recreational boating. In short, these slips aren't these slip permits aren't assigned for the purpose of doing illegal business or illegal liveaboard. So the demand for slips to accommodate these priority uses far exceeds supply. That's another one of the reasons we believe it's an important public policy commitment to having these slips used for the purpose they were designed. Some people have been waiting decades for a slip. In fact, I have our waiting list printed out with names and dates right here in my binder, and we have people who have been waiting just short of 40 years for a slip in Santa Barbara Harbor. And so if you think about staff's commitments and direction on this, we're committed to, A, having the slips used for their intention, and B, not having them used for what they're not intended for, so that every chance we get, we can make slips available to the boating public. People waiting 40 years to go boating in Santa Barbara Harbor have paid a minimum of $1,600 just at $40 a year waiting on the list for the possibility of going boating. When I took this job in 2000, there were 79 people on that waiting list. There are 28 now. We have a discernible commitment to those individuals to assign those slips off the waiting list whenever possible, and activities like the ones I just described undercut our ability to do that. So the grounds for termination in the case before you tonight. So as part of our routine reviews of the Airbnb site, which resulted in the outreach efforts I described earlier, we came across one in July 2014 listing for vacation rental and island charters. It was listed in Carpinteria and Goleta Airbnb sites, but not Santa Barbara. Goleta and Carpinteria, but not Santa Barbara. There was no vessel name. Only the name, quote-unquote, Randy was listed as the host. Listed for nightly, weekly, and monthly rates, with a monthly rate, you'll see here in a moment, equal to 9 times the monthly slip fee to stay aboard the boat as a vacation rental. Photos of were taken, Mr. Chair, photos that appeared on the Airbnb posting either showed the boat, but they were taken from the boat, or they showed the boat far out at sea, or they showed happy people who were apparently customers of the person renting the boatel. There was no CF numbers visible. There were no identifying aspects of the vessel by which you could understand where it was or which vessel it was. And so we realized that this individual had gone to great lengths to not advertise exactly where the boat was located and what exactly was being undertaken on that boat. We looked at customer reviews and saw that it was used for island charters. Here are a few of the pictures from that site. The arrows show some of the rates that were being charged for this. Weekly, $800 a week. Monthly, $3,000 a month, or $85 a night. More pictures from the site. This is attachment 19 in your staff report. Further, more pictures. Can't tell where the boat is, what its name is, just generally the type of vessel it is. No identifying pictures at all. So these were comments from customers of this business using the name Randy, who we later found out was not a Randy, but we'll get to that. He was a great captain. We rode alongside dolphins and explored different areas around Santa Cruz Island. This indicates the fact that it was not only being used for vacation rental, it was also being used for charters, and it advertised wide open here for charters. He made the last-minute accommodations for me and my 2 boys on his boat in Santa Barbara Harbor, and so we began to at least understand now that it was in our harbor for sure and not in another harbor where it was advertised. So on November 7th of 2014, Randy, quote-unquote Randy, began an online dialogue with a prospective customer, and he admitted in that dialogue to having a vague profile and keeping it low-key, and said his boat was in Santa Barbara Harbor and claimed he was living aboard. In fact, direct quotes from that interaction. That dialogue includes, sorry about my vague profile, but the city does not like my Airbnb business, so I have to keep it low-key. My boat is actually based out of Santa Barbara Harbor. There's only one quote-unquote private room with a door on the boat. I live on the boat, but I can sleep elsewhere if you so desire. So subsequently, Randy provided a phone number for the prospective client to text him if he wanted more information. And at that point, we cross-referenced that number with our waterfront department records, and it matched a parking permit and a phone number for one Mario Geary, who was a vessel co-owner but not the slip permittee with Richard Smith on 4A21. In other words, they co-owned the vessel in 4A21, but Mr. Geary was not a slip permittee. He was, as you'll see, and it's in your packet, basically a sub-renter. Further research via Google and Facebook indicated photos posted on quote-unquote Randy's Airbnb, a.k.a. Randy, were identical to photos posted on a Google blog registered to Mario Geary and a Facebook account for a Mario Randleson, again, a.k.a. Randy. In a summary, it appears Randy was an alias used by Mario Geary for promoting his Airbnb business from 4A21, which would be in line with the conclusions we were drawing based on the fact that he didn't tell where the boat was, he didn't show what the boat looked like, he didn't show any CF numbers or identifying aspects of the boat. So it all made pretty clear sense to us, plus his admission that he had to keep a low profile because the city doesn't allow this kind of activity. Further investigation, these are the two images I was talking about. On the left is his Google account, Mr. Geary's Google account. On the right is Facebook account. Identical images of the individual, Mr. Mario Geary, who is apparently undertaking this Airbnb business out of 4A21. An important note, Mr. Richard Smith has been the sole slip permittee in 4A21, a 35-foot slip, since 1999. In 2011, he switched boats registered to that slip, adding Mario Geary as a co-owner of the vessel, but not as a co-slip permittee, as I mentioned earlier. Since Mr. Smith became a slip permittee in 4A21, he has not applied for a liveaboard permit or a business activity permit. And I'd just also like to draw your attention to attachment 4 that relates to this. In Mr. Smith's legal counsel letter, he describes the fact that Mr. Smith, the reason that he took on this boat partner, not a slip partner, but a boat partner, because he had no interest in using the slip. And that the boat partner, in fact, not Mr. Smith, was paying the slip fees. These are the exact kinds of behavior and procedures that the municipal code and the rules and regulations attached to the slip permit, which Mr. Smith signed, are intended to prevent. Mr. Smith signed the slip permit rules and regulations expressly providing that the slip permit may not be loaned or used by any other person, and stating that the slip permit is responsible and accountable for the activities of his or her guests, visitors, and invitees, all of which is codified in Title 17 of the Municipal Code. Mr. Smith allowed Mr. Geary to live aboard and conduct a business out of 4A21 without the required liveaboard permit or business activity permit, each of which is a violation of the Municipal Code. So further on the grounds for terminating Mr. Smith's slip permit, on November 19th, I, myself, and our executive assistant, Ms. Brzezinski, Jeanette Brzezinski, met with Mr. Smith, and I informed him of the Waterfront Department's investigation and findings, plus the pending termination of Mr. Smith's slip permit. He said he had told Mr. Geary to take down the Airbnb site, quote, a couple of months ago, so apparently was aware of it. Mr. Smith asked if we could conference call Mr. Geary, and then told, and we were successful in dialing him up, and then told Mr. Geary that the waterfront, was terminating Mr. Smith's slip permit. Mr. Geary replied that he thought the worst that would happen would be if he, Mr. Geary, got caught. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. Mr. Geary replied that he thought the worst that would happen if Mr. Geary got caught was termination of the lease between himself and Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was quick to correct that. He said he called it a partnership. Mr. Geary asked Mr. Smith how soon he needed to get, quote-unquote, his boat, Mr. Geary's boat, out of Mr. Smith's slip, and the boat was gone 4 days later. So, in summary, In terms of the grounds for termination, it's very clear that Mr. Slip allowed his guest, Mr. Geary, for whom he's responsible, to live aboard the boat on any 4 nights during a 7-night period without a live aboard permit. Remember, anything above 3 nights is a violation of our live aboard regulations. He allowed his guest, Mr. Geary, for whom he's responsible, to conduct business activities, vacation rentals, island charters, and what have you, without a business permit issued by the department. Also, Rule 17 in the slip permit itself, in the rules and regulations, prohibits slips from being loaned or subleased by the slip permittee. Mr. Geary violated Rule 17 by loaning his slip to Mr. Geary and allowing his guest, Mr. Geary, for whom he's responsible, to loan out that slip for the purposes of operating vacation rentals of the boat and slip plus island charters. So if you think about it in layers, there are actually 2 sub-rentals here. First, to Mr. Geary, who was paying the rent, and Mr. Smith said he had no knowledge of what was even going on. And number 2, Mr. Geary's activities, renting the boat for botels and for island charters, both of which are illegal. I believe at this point Ms. Connect has a few comments relative to slip permits being licenses. I know there's been some discussion in that, and you can see the back and forth in the staff report. But I'm going to turn the microphone over to Ms. Connect at this point to explain some of those fine points.
Thank you, Mr. Croman. Commissioners, good evening. Thank you. Just briefly, I wanted to address one point, and that is that the appellant has asserted in his appeal that slip permits are not licenses, but rather they are leases that grant to the slip permittees a real property interest in the slip and can be terminated only through the unlawful detainer procedures in the Superior Court. And I just wanted to briefly address that with you. The critical factor in determining whether a contract is a license or a lease is whether and what type of possession is granted by the parties to the contract. If the contract gives the tenant exclusive possession of the property, that's the critical factor, even against the owner, then it's generally a lease. If the contract by contrast is merely a privilege to occupy the property under the permission of the owner, then it's generally a license. In Santa Barbara, slip permits by their terms are licenses, which do not convey an interest in real property. Exclusive possession is not given. It's only a limited right to occupy the slip, which is always given subject to permission of the waterfront. A couple of examples that Mr. Croman has already pointed out, which are contained in the slip permit and in the rules and regulations themselves, include in the slip permit language, we have number 4, which provides that the city may reassign the slip permittee to a different berth and may use the assigned berth for a different vessel. Clearly, that doesn't convey exclusive possession of the slip. In the rules and regulations, number 7 provides that at the discretion of the waterfront director, boats may be moved or they may be reassigned as necessary. Clearly, again, there's no exclusive possession of the slips. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Croman, does that conclude your presentation?
It does, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And I have 3 permission to speak slips. And I don't know what order, gentlemen, you want to proceed. Mr. Tapanier, please.
What's his name?
I can't pronounce.
And the commission members, thank you for taking the time to hear Mr. Smith's appeal tonight. The first thing I wanted to start with was just kind of a quick factual background, which is we don't have a lot of disputes over the factual background set forth by Mr. Croman, but I just want to run through my factual background that I set forth and then draw out one thing that Mr. Croman had said that I disagree with. So Mr. Smith had the slip since September 13, 1999. He paid $36,000 in transfer fees and private parties fees to acquire the slip. Prior to this incident, there were no real problems with Mr. Smith's use of the slip. In 2011, Mr. Geary, who's present here today, Mr. Travis Faker, Faker, and Mr. Smith became owners of a new vessel. The boat that Mr. Smith had was no longer available. So Mr. Faker dropped out of the partnership in early 2012, and after that time, Mr. Geary was the only person really using the slip, although they were owners of the boat together, Mr. Geary and Mr. Smith, and Mr. Smith was not making any use of the boat that was there. In August 2014, Mr. Smith first became aware that Mr. Geary was possibly using the slip either to live aboard or do this boatel, quote, activity. And he learned that through Mr. Geary, and I think Mr. Geary had been contacted by somebody at the harbor. And at that time, Mr. Smith said, I don't want you to do that activity anymore. Please stop, and if you're doing anything wrong, please don't do it anymore. And Mr. Geary, I think, will confirm today that he confirmed that he would no longer engage in any of those activities. So later then, as Mr. Croman pointed out, in November 2014, I guess the activity had continued. They then notified Mr. Smith that that the harbor waterfront director had determined that they were going to terminate the slip, and they proceeded to do that. We filed for a request for a waiver, and that was denied, and so we're here today. The only thing in Mr. Croman's, I think, his presentation, he keeps saying that Mr. Smith allowed this to happen. That's not actually true. While I understand the municipal code section that he's responsible for his guests and invitees, et cetera, he didn't actually allow anything because he wasn't aware of it. And when he became aware of it, he asked it to be stopped. So that's a distinction that is important. As the commission members, I think, are aware, there's significant money paid for these slips, and because most of the people on the waiting list probably don't get them through the waiting list. I think they get them through transfers, and there's private party payments that are made to the city gets a substantial transfer fee, and then the party that owns the slip also gets paid typically through these side agreements, and probably everyone's aware of that. So that's probably why none of the slips actually come up through the waiting list very often, and there's a huge waiting list. So those are the facts as we understand them. And then I just want to take you quickly through the legal part, our position. And if I have a small handout, if I can pass that out, it just has the case that we cited in our appeal letter. And I brought 9 copies, so I hope that's enough. So there's, okay. And there's just one other item in there, which is a copy of the property tax statement that is paid by Mr. Smith every year, real property tax, which would confirm that it's actually, the slip is real property. And we'll go through the cases together, or the case holding together, and some other important California law that I think confirms that it is a real property interest. And just because you call it a license, it doesn't become so. And so if you don't mind, if we can go through Exhibit 1 is the real property, unsecured property tax statement that is sent to Mr. Smith as the owner of the slip. He's identified in that document as the owner. And the amount is there. He pays Prop 13 property tax on $38,000, which is pretty close to what he paid for the slip. Prop 13 is a real property tax proposition. So to me, this reinforces the fact that these slips are actually real property. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And if we can turn to tab 2, this is the holding, the case that was cited by the Court of Appeal in my letter. And there's some highlighted language, which I think is important. In this case, the facts are different, and I think it was addressed a little bit in the city's response. The city attorney, that what was happening in this particular case was the city was, there's a third party involved that the city had given rights to basically lease out the slips. In that case, they went to terminate the slip owner's rights, and the city or the third party that they had contracted out with filed an unlawful detainer action, which is what you would normally do with real property. And the slip owner said, you can't do that. My slip interest isn't real property. So that's the distinction here. Here we're saying that before you can terminate a slip owner's right, you need to go through a court proceeding, not just through this proceeding, because this would be either an unlawful detainer or some other type of court proceeding. So the holding from the court, if we look at the summary part here on page 1, the first highlighted part says, the Court of Appeal denied the petition, holding that the occupancy of a rented boat slip in navigable waters amounts to an occupancy of real property for purposes of unlawful detainer. Back here in the next section, the head notes, that's confirmed again. It says the occupancy of a rental slip in navigable waters amounts to an occupancy of real property for purposes of unlawful detainer. That's just kind of the summary. On the next page, the highlighted section, there in the first column is the holding is it's undisputed that the boat, when berthed, floats on navigable waters. Okay, and then turning to the next page, the first highlighted section is we have concluded that expansive interpretation is not needed to reach the holding that a marina slip is within recognized definitions of real property. And going further, the next paragraph, the issue is not whether the vessel is real property because it's tied to a wharf, but whether the rental of the space on the water is a rental of real property. And then this kind of longer section down here, property is defined as the thing of which there may be ownership. Thus, if something can be owned and cannot be moved, like the surface of a body of navigable water, it constitutes real property. And strangely enough, this is also a Smith case, but it says Smith's leasehold interest in his boat slip would therefore seem to be an interest in real property subject to unlawful detainer. And further, the court held, the logic finds support in the law of water ownership. Water in its natural state is a part of the land and therefore real property. So the conclusion by the court, since the water on which Mr. Smith's boat rests is real property, then the TMI is the third-party company, may employ unlawful detainer to remove tenants. And so the final holding is we conclude the occupancy of a rental boat slip in navigable waters amounts to an occupancy of real property for purposes of unlawful detainer. I think our review of the case and research suggests that this hasn't been tested here. The case is compelling, that I believe that there is a good case to say that it is real property and would have to be terminated through proceedings other than what we're having tonight. I have one other handout that I just happened to find today, and this is, if I can hand this out, I didn't attach it to your exhibit list, but I just got it before I came over. There's 5 there. I don't know if I made enough copies of that particular document. This is a pretty compelling statement, and this is in the California Real Estate Digest regarding waters. And I'll let you have it before we get to that section. But and so the highlighted part that I made today, or that I highlighted for your reference, is again confirming that water in its natural state is a part of the land and therefore real property. They cite to the Smith case. And then further, the next sentence, once rights to use water are acquired, they become vested property rights. As such, they cannot be infringed by others or taken by governmental action without due process and just compensation. To me, that's a pretty strong statement. I think that the people that own slips in the Santa Barbara Harbor have paid significant money for them. And I think before they can be taken, they either have to go through a court proceeding or be justly compensated. There's a lot of money at stake. I can understand. I was born and raised here, and we want to keep our harbor nice, and we're not looking to have people run boating charter activities and botels down in the harbor. My brother has a boat down there, and I agree with that. In this case is a little bit different. I think the Harbor Commission, the waterfront director, gave plenty of notice to owners about what was, prohibited, and very diligent about not allowing this activity. But it wasn't Mr. Smith who engaged in the activity, and again, I realize he's responsible under the license and the municipal code for the activities of somebody who's occupying the slip. But I would ask that be taken into consideration. He wasn't the one doing the activity. And our proposal, I think, is a reasonable proposal, which was simply to allow that slip right to be reinstated conditionally and allow Mr. Smith to then transfer it, or at least try to transfer it to a third party so he could recoup some of the expense that he paid for the slip. And that was the proposal I made to Mr. Reedman, and he said it might be considered by the commission, and I would ask that that be considered tonight. It's an interesting case. I do think if the slip permit is terminated, then we will proceed with an injunction and see what the court thinks about it. I think the case law is pretty prevailing on that it's a real property interest and not a license. So I'm happy to answer questions if the commission or the chair has any.
Thank you very much. Do we need to hear the other two before questions, or we take it as it comes?
Mr. Chair, you can take that as it
Very good.
is up at the podium
Okay.
now.
Any questions for Mr. Smith's counsel?
I'd like to hear the other two.
Very good. I think we'll. Just with this gentleman, yeah.
Well, just to be clear, I don't know if Mr. Smith or Mr. Geary want to address but if you have questions of them, I think they would be willing to answer them if I'm not able to. Did you want to?
Very good. I have request to speak slips from both of them.
Right. We were told we had to fill those out.
Gotcha.
So.
Okay. Well, then I guess at this point, let's ask those gentlemen if they do want to speak.
Okay. Do you want to add anything?
I'll speak and take questions.
Would you like to talk to Mr. Geary?
I think we'd like to hear from him, yes.
Sure.
I know I would.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, Commissioner and Commissioners. Yes, I'm Mario Geary. Sorry for all the confusion there. Just for a little bit of background, I'm a Marine infantryman. I was coming back from my second deployment in 2011, and I got the bright idea to buy a boat here in Santa Barbara. I wasn't very clear really much about the laws and regulations of everything. So I purchased the boat, and then the question came up, where are we going to put the boat? My broker said, hey, Rick would like a partnership, to fill the slip. So we did do the agreement that was said before. So the issue was I never became clear myself, and it's this case is all based upon my error. I went ahead and went on my third deployment in 2013, and then came back late in 2013, in about December, to the boat. And then in 2014 was when I started engaging in this activity. And I think the key to the case here is that I received a call to stop the activity. I told Rick, yes, I'd stop the activity. So I actively undermined his direction. So I think that's kind of the key here. I definitely actively and proactively told him that I wasn't doing it, and I did continue the activity. So as far as that, I guess I'll take questions.
Okay, Commissioner Power.
Mr. Geary, did you pay the slip fees while you were occupying it to the city?
With the deal with Rick.
So you didn't pay them directly, or did you?
No, not.
So you paid them to Mr. Smith?
Yes.
And then presumably Mr. Smith paid the slip fees?
Presumably, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think at this point we should open up for questions on any of the topics. So go ahead, Commissioner Webb.
Mr. Geary, do you have your Coast Guard captain's license?
No.
Any questions for the city? Mr. Kralman's report? Commissioner Power.
It would help me. What I'm hearing is that there might be conflict between the city's municipal code and the municipal court's decision for the San Mateo County. And I wondered if the city attorney would have any opinion about that. I think we heard from you that this is not a lease. It's not real property, but we're hearing from member of the public that it is. So it would be good to have your assessment, for me at least. Thank you.
The city's position is that the interest possessed by Mr. Smith is a license only. And the best way to think of a license, in addition to what Ms. Connect said about exclusive use not being part of the privilege that a license conveys, is to compare it to a ticket to a ball game. A ticket to a ball game is a license. You don't get the right to sell the seat. With that, you get the right to occupy it during the game. The Smith case stands for the proposition that a leasehold interest, I'll call your attention to the second to last page of the Smith case. The court, it says, Smith's leasehold interest in his boat slip therefore would seem to be an interest in real property. What I believe is that the court assumed there was a leasehold interest. The court didn't address whether there was, in fact, just a license. So Santa Barbara's slip permits are set up very carefully only to convey the right included within a license.
Just a follow-up question. I've noticed in the San Mateo County situation, San Mateo County had apparently leased or given rights to operate a marina to a private enterprise. The private enterprise, in turn, was the one that then rented slips. Does the fact that there's that extra step in there make any difference whatsoever, you think, in the court's finding in the San Mateo case that it was real property as opposed to something else?
I think the court was trying to allow the use of the unlawful detainer procedure. It wasn't saying that you have to use it. It was trying to allow it. And the reasoning path to get there was to describe the slip interest as a leasehold and as an interest in real property. It doesn't compel you to grant a slip license in that manner. So I don't think the two-step process necessarily made a difference.
Any further questions? Mr. Geary, I appreciate your candidness in this. I would recommend that we uphold the termination, but I'm open to the commission, and if not, I'll take a second on that.
I'll second that, and then I have some comments.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My issues are, and thank you all for being here, and thank you, Mr. Tappanir, and the issue is really one. It's not arguing the merits of the case. Really, I think you're kind of arguing the legal side. And while we are the judge in some case, this could go to a real judge, and that's certainly your prerogative. But in this instance, it's kind of who do we believe, right? We have our city attorney here saying one thing, and you're saying another thing, and like I said, I mean it's your prerogative. But as far as the merits of the case, I appreciate Mr. Geary being candid as well. But I think that's between the two parties, to resolve what happened there. And I think our staff has laid out what the history has been on the slip, and I think that's why I'm going to be in support of the motion as well.
Unless there's more question or comment, I'm going to call for a vote.
I've got a comment.
Kramer?
I don't feel capable of deciding the legal issue of something, of whether it's a lease, unlawful detainer, or permit. I think our role as a Harbor Commission is to work within the city rules and how the city interprets things, and that's at least how I interpret my role. And so I will be supporting the motion.
Okay. At this point,
and I want to add also, I think that there were numerous publications around the harbor about this, so it's pretty common knowledge that one should not be renting out one's boat.
Commissioner Power.
Mr. Spicer, would you please restate the motion?
My motion was to A, uphold the termination of the Mr. Smith slip, and Mr. Bantlin seconded that. At this point, I will call for a vote. All in favor of the recommendation A to uphold the termination, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any noes? Any abstentions? All right. It passes. Gentlemen, I thank you as well.
Thank you.
We now move to new business. You know, I would like to ask for a 3-minute recess before we move on and finish, if we're okay with that. Why? Because I want to get a drink of water. Okay? So, do we need a vote?
Go for it.
Okay.
Certainly, we'll reconvene in a few minutes.
Thank you very much.
Let's tear it up.
Poets often use many words to say a simple thing. It takes thought and time and rhyme to make a poem sing. With music and words I've been playing, for you I have written a song. To be sure that you'll know what I'm saying, I'll translate as I go along. Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, darling, kiss me. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true. In other words, I love you. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true. In other words, I love you.
A dope, a man of many faults, a clumsy Joe who wouldn't know a rumba from a waltz. The gentleman is a dope and not my cup of tea. Why do I get in a dither? He doesn't belong to me. The gentleman isn't bright, he doesn't know the score. A cake will come, he'll take a crumb and never ask for more. The gentleman's eyes are blue, but little do they see. When I've eaten my brains out, he doesn't belong to me. He's somebody else's problem. She's welcome to the guy. She'll never understand him half as well as I. The gentleman is a dope. He isn't very smart. He's just a lug you'd like to hug and hold against your heart. The gentleman doesn't know how happy he could be. Look at me crying my eyes out as if he belonged to me. He'll never belong to me. The gentleman doesn't know how happy he could be. Look at me crying my eyes out as if he belonged to me. He'll never belong to me.
I wish I knew someone like you could love me. I wish I knew you placed no one above me. Did I mistake this for a real romance?
That was a long 3 minutes. I'd like to ask to reconvene. Jeanette, you ready? Okay. Thank you for the break. We will now move on to new business and item number 7.
Item 7, fiscal year 2016 and 2017 operating budget recommendation. Recommendation that Harbor Commission A receive a staff presentation on the Waterfront Department's proposed fiscal year 2016 and fiscal year 2017 budget submittal. B, recommend approval of a $25 per linear foot slip transfer fee increase in fiscal year 2016 and fiscal year 2017 on all slip categories except 20 and 25 foot slips. C, recommend approval of a 2% slip fee increase in fiscal year 2016 and fiscal year 2017. D, recommend approval of a $5 increase to the cost of annual waterfront parking permits. E, recommend approval of a 10-cent per foot increase in the visitor slip fee. F, recommend the establishment of a Harbor Patrol vessel replacement fund. And G, forward a recommendation to City Council for approval of the Waterfront Department's proposed fiscal year 2016 and fiscal year 2017 budgets and incorporation into the city budget process.
Quite a mouthful. Mr. Riedman. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, before we get started, quite a few letters there in that recommendation. Just procedurally, we have a couple of commissioners absent tonight, so when we get through Mr. Bossi's report and so forth, I would suggest that we look at the recommendations, and at recommendation A, there's no action needed, and on recommendation B, we can't take action due to lack of a quorum tonight, so we will just forward that on to the council. And then we can take C through G individually or in the aggregate, however the commission feels that should be taken.
Very good.
And with that, we have, I think you've seen much of this before, so we have a relatively abbreviated report for you tonight on the budget.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Bossi.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. So tonight we have for you our budget recommendation for fiscal year 2016 and 2017. As far as an outline, we'll go through the budget process. We'll go through the budget process. We'll then talk about our proposed fiscal year 2016 fees. You'll want to pay particular attention to that because there are two new fees since the last time you saw this in February. Our capital program funding, we'll review that. We'll also, at the request of a number of commissioners, go over briefly our debt service obligations and the dollar amounts. And then I'll discuss a few of our key performance objectives for the coming fiscal year. With that, this is not our first time before you, as Mr. Reedman alluded. We have been working on this process since the end of September. As you can see, we've had a number of meetings with both the Budget Committee as well as the full Harbor Commission, starting off with our capital program at the end of September, the Harbor Commission meeting in October, where you approved the 6-year capital improvement plan, your mid-year budget report in January. We had a Budget Committee meeting with Commissioner Sloan on the 5th of February. We then, at last month's Harbor Commission meeting, presented an overview of our proposed budget for 16 and 17. On the 2nd of March, we had our annual meeting with the City Administrator and Finance Department staff for a review of our draft budget submittal. That went very smoothly. On the 6th of March, we had another committee meeting with your Budget Committee, where we reviewed 16 and 17 proposed fees, revenues, and debt service, and we are here tonight with our budget recommendations. So there have been a lot of meetings on this. We've been down in the weeds most of these meetings. So for this particular presentation, I'm going to take a step back and kind of give you the 30,000-foot version of our budget. As far as revenues and expenditures are concerned, we do have a number of charts as attachments, as well as you've seen them in previous presentations of where we are at. This is part of our 6-year capital planning process that we go through every year. It's a great tool for us, and you'll hear me referencing it a number of times tonight. But this is about as simple as you can get. Revenue is in green, and our expenditures are in red. And as you can see, although they increase over time out through 2022, we continue to have our revenues exceed our expenditures, which is always a good thing, especially as an enterprise department. As far as fiscal year 2016 proposed fee adjustments, the first two you have seen before, our slip rental fee, a 2% increase, which is similar to what we've done the past 4 or 5 fiscal years, a slip transfer fee increase of $25 per foot. This would not include the 20 or 25-foot slips, which have been frozen. The two new proposed fees are a parking permit fee, a $5 increase to the general public parking permit, which is currently at $95, so that would take that to an even $100, and then a $5 increase as well to our slip holders, which would go from $70 to $75. The last time the parking permit fee was changed was back in 2008. And then lastly, our visitor fee, a 10-cent increase going from 90 cents a foot to $1 a foot, an even dollar. And that the last time that was changed was in fiscal year 2010. So we like to keep up to date as much as possible with fees, and so these haven't been changed in a while. These have been reviewed by the Harbor Commission's Budget Committee. So one of the things people ask is 2%. What does that mean? How does that impact me as a slip holder? So here's a quick chart of the impact. You'll see the change per foot, and I've just taken a number of our slip lengths. 20 foot, you'd see a 17 cent increase per foot, and on a month basis, that would be about $3.37 added to your current rate. All the way up to a 60-footer, you'd see about a 24-cent increase per foot, and that would add a little over $14 to your monthly slip fee. Now, the next question that generally comes up, okay, I get that, that's not too bad, but how does that compare with other marinas? Well, every February, our staff sends out a survey to 18 different marinas, and slip fees are one of the many questions we ask them. It's a very thorough process, lots of spreadsheets, and lots of good information that comes back, and we share this with those marinas as well, generally from Point Conception down, and both private and public marinas. So I put together a quick comparison. On the top, you'll see the categories of the marina, and then I've divided it. I tried to get a hold. Everybody's got a little bit different how they do their slips in feet, so I've taken the basics of 30, 40, 50, and 60-foot slips. And on the right, you'll see the occupancy for the different marinas. On the top, you'll see, second row is Santa Barbara's, and our various slip fees all the way across. And you'll also note that our occupancy is 100%. Based on our slip waiting list, you could say above 100%. The next three marinas are all private marinas, and they're asterisked one because they are private marinas, but also included in their slip fee is the possessory interest tax that they include in their slip fees. So you have Ventura Isle all the way across. They're at 61%. Anacapa Isle is at 48% occupancy. And Bahia Cabrillo is at 58%. You'll also notice that each of their slip fees from the 30, 40, 50, and 60 are significantly higher than the city of Santa Barbara's. The last marina on there is the city of Long Beach's Shoreline Marina, and their various rates, they're at 80% occupancy. And so one of the questions that follows this is, well, Santa Barbara doesn't include possessory interest tax. So we've done some research with the county tax collector, and they're very happy to share their methodology with us. But basically, on a 25-foot slip, if you're looking, what would that add to a 25-foot slip? Although that's not up here. These were the figures he gave me, so you can extrapolate from there. A 25-foot slip pays about $305 per year in possessory interest tax. That equates to about $25 a month. The one that they do have comparable that he provided to me with the chart you'll see on the screen is a 50-foot slip would pay about $1,983 a year in possessory interest tax, which equals about $165 a month. So looking at our 50-foot slip fee at $543, if you were to add that $165 on top of that, you're looking at a little over $700, which, as you can see, is significantly below any of the other slip fees on this chart. So basically what we're trying to show you here is that we are full and we are very competitive and a very sought-after place to be, especially with our slip rates, not to mention the wonderful environment we provide down there. So that's a comparison. Moving into, again, at the 30,000-foot level, our capital projects. You've seen these many, many times, so I'm not going to go into great detail or any detail as far as what those projects are. They're in your attachments to the report. But our funding comes from a number of sources. Our reserves above policy and our capital reserve, also known as our Harbor Preservation Fund, as well as state grants and loans from the Division of Boating Waterways is a big source for us. Our reserves above policy, I believe a question was asked last time as to how that was set up. We are required to set aside 25%, an amount equal to 25% of our operating budget, and 15% of that is for emergencies or unanticipated expenses. This could be freak storms that come in and destroy things that we have to then pay for. And then 10%, an amount equivalent to 10%, is for economic downturns. And our reserves are quite good at the current time. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Carl, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about the Harbor Patrol Vessel Replacement Fund that we're proposing.
Chair Spicer and Commissioners, we have a recommendation before you this evening to start a new Harbor Patrol Vessel Replacement Fund. Our fleet is rather old. This is our newest vessel. It's over 15 years old, Boat 3, our kind of ocean-going vessel. I think we skipped past the other boats. Our other two vessels are over 30 years old. They're locally built by Radden, local boat builder, very strong, very good, but they're old. Click through. We have extended their useful life by replacing engines over the years, and I earlier this year presented to you a capital improvement project that includes repowering these vessels, and we're pretty confident that we can get another 5, 6, 7 years at a time by putting new engines in. We're applying for grants to go ahead and do with that, and that's in our capital improvement plan, which was approved by you and has already been seen by the City Council one time. Nevertheless, these boats are going to require eventual replacement. And that replacement cost is quite high. It's probably at least $500,000 for a new state-of-the-art boat, especially a larger one, a fire boat. Boats 2 and 3 are fire boats. Boat 1 is a smaller boat, but it is the workhorse of the fleet. So our proposal this evening, our recommendation to you, is to establish a reserve fund similar to what we have in the city's Public Works Department, the Motor Pool Department. So what they do is they've calculated an annual allocation based on a vehicle useful life formula. For example, a sedan lasts 11 years. It costs $25,000. The cost to increase goes up 2% per year over the life of the vehicle, and then we allocate a certain amount of money per vehicle per department over the years that drops into a reserve fund that they have, a replacement fund that they have. That's a little bit of a sophisticated formula to apply to boats. It just really doesn't work. These boats are 30 years old, and they're still pretty darn good with new engines in them. So at this point, we have discussed just starting off with $50,000 a year, get this reserve fund started, and develop a formula probably within the next budget. It would take quite a task to go back and see just how much the old boats cost, how much we put into it, and kind of extrapolate that number out to see what the exact number is. Just on this basic $50,000 a year and the basic cost of at least $500,000 for a new vessel, it would take 10 years before we'd have enough money for one boat. There are some details to work out. I think Scott has tried to set up a meeting with finance to go through some of the fund details. Motor pool, we have an operating expense item that transfers into a reserve account, and we would develop something like that. So over the course of what's remaining useful life of these vessels, as opposed to taking a huge hit on any given year, we would have this vessel replacement fund to draw from, and that's how the rest of the city works. And it's much, much easier to work with, especially for someone like agency like the fire department, where a fire truck costs a lot of money, and it's much easier for them to absorb that expense through a program like this.
Earlier, I referenced our 6-year capital planning process. Again, we do it every year, and it's a wonderful tool for us, especially being an enterprise fund where we have to generate all our own revenue. We're responsible for our expenses as well, obviously, and we get no support from the general fund. So we really need to look out at what capital projects are being planned. Are there any big-ticket items out there that we need to adjust for? Do we need to raise fees here or there? How are we going to make sure that we remain in the good as far as revenues and expenditures are concerned? So looking at our operating fund and our harbor preservation fund, we are required to keep a minimum balance at least of $2 million in our harbor preservation fund. And this line chart shows you in green is our harbor preservation fund. As you can see, planning out with all the increases we're estimating over the coming years in both revenues and expenses, as well as big ticket items, we remain above that $2 million figure. Our operating fund does continue to increase, as do every other department's, but ours is about as flat as you can get. We're really doing a good job cutting down on operating expenses, especially in our parking program. So what you can take away from this chart is the harbor or the waterfront department is, as it looks right now, in good hands through 2022. Now, looking out to our debt service, this is also factored into our 6-year cash flow models. We have four different areas of debt service. We have our certificates of participation. You'll see the details up there. I believe Commissioner Sloan asked last month, how much is our total debt service? When you add all these up, you're just a little bit over, or actually you're just under $23 million. So it's $22,774,000 when you total those up. They vary anywhere from 11 years remaining on the term of the loan for the general fund loan, the third bullet down, to 28 years remaining, which is the Division of Boating and Waterways loan. So that's a quick summary of the rates, the years remaining, as well as the dollar figures on our debt service obligations. And again, those obviously are factored into our cash flow, our 6-year cash flow models. As far as our debt coverage ratio, we are required to have a debt coverage ratio of a minimum of 1.5, and that's per our Division of Boating and Waterways loan that we get. And that debt coverage ratio is equal to our revenues minus our expenditures, and that doesn't include our capital program, over our debt service. And so that needs to be at 1.5 or above. Now you can see from this chart, this line graph, that we cross under, I should say, that 1.5 minimum around 2019. And that's not reason to panic yet, and we don't think it's going to be an issue, because what we do is we underestimate our revenues. We're very conservative with our revenues. Again, I go back to it every time I'm here. Weather is a big player in our revenues. I also want to say that we're conservative in our revenue projections, and we always are below in our expenditures. So that combination, we hope, will continue to push us crossing under that 1.5 further and further out as we move on. And obviously, if this continues, we would need to see what we can do to make that stay above the 1.5. But at this particular time, we're not real concerned with that. And again, we address it every year, and it continues to stay above. Now, a few key performance objectives as part of the city's P3 program. These are just a couple of highlights. We have pages and pages of this in our budget document, but I thought I'd just highlight a couple. As far as our administration and community relations programs, we're going to continue to increase our media contacts. We have a new administrative analyst who has worked with the media for many years, and she's also one of our PIOs. She does great work with the media and for publicizing things like the Harbor and Seafood Festival and just what's going down at the Waterfront Department and the harbor. And this coming year, we plan on serving 85,000 cruise ship passengers. That keeps us right within what we've been doing in the past. Again, we're going to have about 25 or so cruise ships for fiscal year 2016. Our parking services maintain an annual operating expense below 40% of the revenue collected. This used to be up at 55%, but with the installation of the Luke machines, we've been able to cut down on our operational costs, our labor costs, which has been great, as well at the same time increase our revenue in that division or in that program. And in Harbor Patrol, always important, coordinating the 3 different joint agency emergency response drills in the harbor. Harbor Patrol does a great job of working with the police, our local fire, sheriffs, and everybody in between to make sure we have coordinated responses down at the harbor. And as you've seen from the past presentations by Mr. Cronman, they do a great job of that. So those are a few of our key performance objectives. And again, that 30,000-foot view of the proposed budget for fiscal year 2016. And with that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you need to get down in the weeds one more time, happy to do that too. Oh, and I should say that one of the other questions that came up last month from Commissioner Bantolin, and I forgot to mention this, was with our revenues and expenditures, our interest income seemed excessively high. We've gone back, we've worked with our finance department, and that has been revised downward. Originally, it was revised, it was about $134,000 they were estimating. It got bumped down to $117,000. However, at about 3:45 today, I received another email from our finance department, and this went out to all the business managers with a complete revision of the interest income numbers. And now it's dropped down to, I believe it's $95,000, which is what we're expecting when we reported back in January, when we project out with our 3-year seasonal averages. When we project that out, we anticipated about $92,000 this year, and they're estimated about $95,000. So they have revised those throughout the whole city, so I thought Commissioner Bantolin would like to hear about that.
Thank you, Mr. Bossi. Questions? Commissioner Power.
Two things, Mr. Spicer. First, I was just taken with the key performance objectives. Do you have objectives like this that the city manager looks to you to accomplish? And I guess that would open the question of, if you do, are there others that would be interesting to share with the commission?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Power, this whole program was set up by our former city administrator when he came to the city a number of years ago. So every department has them. Every program has them. We have program owners that are responsible for them. In our particular department, Harbor Patrol has a number of, everybody has them. No, there isn't a division or a department that doesn't. And so we pay very close attention to these. As far as management contracts and things like that, we meet with the city administrator, and he reviews them in depth on a regular basis. And these are all presented both online on the city's website as well as in the budget document that goes out for the public.
Once I saw that name, Key Performance Objectives, I assumed this was a citywide administrative task.
Very much so, and it's made very public.
That does lead me to the question: are there? I'm assuming you have many more than just these three, and would it be relevant for the commission to see these sometime? Not that we judge you on them. It's kind of interesting to know some of the hoops that you have to jump through in your ongoing processes.
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Power, we'd be happy to come and give you a presentation on our P3 program. Yeah. And yes, we are tied to them. Our performance evaluations are tied to them as well. So there's lots of hoops that we jump through, and I think you'd be very interested in a number of them. Yeah, and there are many. I wish it was only these three, but there are many more.
And I don't want to get bogged down in the workings that we know you're carrying on perfectly admirably. Maybe just some that would be most interesting to a body like a commission that sort of has a different level of public responsibility. So
sure, happy to do that.
Yeah, and no rush.
Yeah, certainly, Chair Spicer, Commissioner Power, we have all sorts, like Mr. Bossi mentioned, in the different divisions. For example, property management, one of them is collect, I think, 99% of rents by the due date in the lease. We're very diligent about that. We get 100%. Others are in our facilities maintenance division, how many hours in service hours are the Harbor Patrol boats kept operating, and so we track all of those things. And we could bring back a few from each program and show you some of the more interesting ones. The parking services one here is one of my favorites because it's 60 cents on the dollar is profit, if you will, and so I can really key in on that one.
Yeah, it'd be fun to see the ones you're excelling in where you've exceeded your Thank you. Oh, I did have one other thing.
Please.
I did, and this is for discussion, not to cut discussion off, but Commissioners McIntosh, Sloan, and I met as the Budget Committee on March 6th, and I think it would be fair to say we came away with the feeling that the proposed fiscal year 16 and 17 budgets, when looked at in the whole picture of out to 2022, were quite reasonable and well thought out. And with that, I would make the motion that we approve, if appropriate, the 5 recommendations C through G.
Very good. I have a few questions, but
yes,
Commissioner Kramer, please.
I have a specific question from Dennis Forrest. I'd like to weed. What's the reason for increasing the parking fee by $5?
I keep doing that, Chair Spicer. Commissioner Kramer, the primary reason is we like to keep our fees, I'm not going to say as close as possible to market because I think that's a whole different realm to go within. But the current parking permit has been at $95 since 2008. Obviously, expenses have increased since that time. Everything's increased from that time, and going from $95 to $100 seems like a palatable increase after 7, it would actually be 8 years since the last time we did it. Again, $100, whether it's $95 or $100, is a significant bargain, if you will, as far as parking is concerned in a beachfront locale. Yeah, as well as the $5 increase equates to about a $20,000 increase in revenues. And when we look at fees and things like that, we don't want to be in a situation where all of a sudden, oh my gosh, look at our 6-year cash flow. We need to increase this fee or that fee by 20% or 15%. We feel it's a more palatable mechanism to gradually increase those when needed, similar to our slip fees. Again, this one hasn't been increased in what will be 8 fiscal years, and we think the time is appropriate to increase that by $5 to $100.
Yeah, I remember when it was increased before, and there was a lot of discussion on the Budget Committee at that time, or some discussion at least. And I think you, Mr. Reedman, would agree with this, that there's a question in raising maybe you wouldn't agree, raising the fees discourages people from parking there, and that it may be a wash. And seems one of the changes now is that quite a few weekends the parking lot is full, and so that people who have paid for these permits can't get in, and there's a bit of dissension and unhappiness around in the community about it. So I think that maybe the fees should not be raised. Is my point.
Thank you, Commissioner Kramer. Other questions? Corey.
Thank you, Mr. Bossi. Thank you, Chair Spicer. I had a question. How many parking passes do we sell annually? And you can give me a ballpark. I'm not looking for an exact.
Yeah, I believe it's over 4,000. And we track those. I'm just trying to, there's a million different numbers in my head, but it's over 4,000.
Okay. I was just
on an annual basis. And, a small amount of that, a very small amount, is when people get a new car and they have to get a new permit. But the overwhelming majority, 99.999%, is in that amount over 4,000.
Okay. So we're looking at $20K basically in additional revenue from that.
Exactly.
And then I was curious on the visitor one as well. It looks like it's going to be about 45 or 50,000 too. So that'll be a nice little pop there.
That's roughly the figure we came up with.
Okay. Switching gears, Mr. Treiberg. What was the name of the local boat company?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Bannerland, Radden, Don Radden.
So when we're looking to purchase a new boat, assuming Mr. Radden is still available, or whoever it may be, is that going to be a fully custom boat? And are the ones we currently have fully custom boats where we get to design everything sort of from top to bottom for our staff?
The hulls aren't custom. They're out of a standard mold for the most part. It would be far too expensive to have a custom mold. So we'd come up with specifications and have a Radden 30 or equal kind of thing. The previous boat, there was a set of specifications. There was a low bidder. It was an aluminum vessel that was built up in Washington. We've worked a lot of bugs out on that particular one. It was difficult commissioning that and making it a reliable vessel. It just so happens that Radden makes an excellent vessel for the Santa Barbara Channel. The vast majority of the urchin fleet are Raddens or similar hulls. So ideally, we would be replacing one in the future with a similar hull. It's really served Harbor Patrol well, I think, over the years.
Very well.
Great, thank you. Back to Commissioner Powers' comments on the performance measures. I think performance measures are only as good as the actual measurement, and sometimes they're not such good questions. I think the ones that we have up there look excellent. It'd be great to see the rest of them come back, and I want to echo Mr. Reedman's pride in the under 40%. And I'll say it again, when the county was exploring beach parking fees, I think the number was around 60%. That it was going to cost us on the dollar, and that was from a private contractor. So we do a great job there. And lastly, I can't take credit, obviously, for city staff revising their numbers. And I know other municipalities are all kind of in flux right now, and it's not great that it's to the downward side, but I do think that that's going to be a little bit more conservative as things continue to change. So I'm very pleased to see that as well. So thank you.
Very good. Helene, okay. I've got a couple questions. Mr. Bossi, you showed the comparables of our slip fees compared. You said there were 18 others, and you showed 4, and you noted 4 that were more expensive than ours. And I'm just curious where the other 14 fall into range.
Commissioner Spicer, great question. I would have loved to have fit all 18 or the other 17 on here, but it wouldn't have fit. So what I did was took a lot of comparables. These folks that you see here are pretty much representative of all the others. We are, in looking back, as far as slip fees are concerned, the lowest.
Okay.
So what I try to do is just took a couple of random ones and threw them in here. So it wasn't, I didn't want it to appear jaded or otherwise, but they're very similar. For example, Alamitos down in Huntington Beach is almost identical to Anacapa Isle and Bahia Cabrillo as far as dollars and cents are concerned, as they don't have an occupancy figure because right now they're under total construction, so they really don't have any occupancy. And everything down from Morro Bay and every other place, we're very well priced.
Okay,
I
very
think
good.
That's the best way to put it.
No problem. I have another couple more. A question that I believe Commissioner Sloan's asked in the past, and when you showed the debt service and our debt percentages range from 6% to 1.2, I think it was. Are we able to refi those? I mean, I realize they're not a home, but I mean, are we able to refinance any of those?
Commissioner Spicer, yes, we are able to refinance. I believe it was fiscal year 14 that we refinanced the COP, the certificates of participation. And it gave us a better rate. So yeah, we are allowed to. The DBA, the Division of Boating Waterways, there's not a whole lot we can do with that one. And then
I guess
Mr.
from my
Reedman
point
might
of
be
view,
able
it's
to
just
add.
the first general fund, which is the highest one. I'd like it to match the other general fund.
Chair Spicer, the two general fund loans were negotiated at an earlier time when interest rates were higher. The 6% is a fixed rate. When we went back and reviewed these loans, I believe actually last year or the year before, we were looking at the second general fund loan you see there, and we realized that what was approved by the council was that the interest rate would be tied to the city's return on its investments. So as we've seen with the declining interest revenue on the revenue side, they were able to change that loan to a variable rate and to match the city's interest rate. I think the finance director would prefer if we made that loan 6% like the other one, but what we did with that other general fund loan, we pay the same amount of payment every year of debt service, but it just shortens the term of the loan because a lot of it's going toward principal instead of interest at that rate. And again, last May, we refinanced the certificates of participation, the big one, the bond, and we didn't extend out the time period or take out any more money. So, hopefully we'll mature that in 15 years or 13 years and put it away.
Great.
Retire it.
Thank you. My next question is, historically, I haven't been a fan of increasing the slip fees, but I know that we've put in a schedule so that any increase is mild, and you showed a slide on that, and I appreciate it. And I just want to make sure we are tied to these slip fee increases because of our loans. Is that correct?
Chair Spicer, that is correct. In particular, to the Division of Boating and Waterways loan. That's where that 2% comes in and that increase.
Okay. And I will support that. My last question for Mr. Treiberg. On the boats and keeping them running on the preservation fund, will that be used for the new engines you talked about, or is this just for purchase of a new vessel?
Air Spicer would be just for purchase of a new vessel sometime out in the future, 10, 15 years from now.
Okay.
The engines will be paid for out of our capital reserves, our harbor preservation fund.
Okay, great. Mr. Bantelin has one more.
One more question, Mr. Treiberg. So we own the current vessels outright, and assuming we could get some value for those when it's time, or I mean, what are the thoughts on that?
Chair Spicer,
We're gonna
Commissioner
sell
Bantelin, we would sell them as such. It kind of depends on how old the engine is at the time when we sell them. That's a big chunk of what any boat like this is worth. So if we sell it and the engine's 7 years old with 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 hours on it, probably wouldn't get a whole lot of money for it. I'd like to note that we are working with our new administrative analyst to support the repower with a grant from Division of Boating and Waterways. We just applied for it this week, as a matter of fact. So hopefully the capital expense on repowering will be offset a certain amounts to help out with that. There is a program that accommodates for that.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to confirm that we're free to do what we'd like with them when it's time. Thanks.
All right, are there any other questions? Commissioner Power has made a motion, and I would look for a second. We have a second. I would like to take these one by one. I think that is appropriate. So I guess assume the motion was for all of them, and we'll just take them one by one. Is that correct? Okay. You're the procedural guy.
Actually, I do have a quick question here. You mentioned, Mr. Reedman, we don't have a quorum on which one. I know we have some slip holders here, but I just wanted to be sure on what we're voting on and what we're not.
We won't be voting on recommendation A because there's no action to be taken there. You've received the report. B, we don't have a quorum to vote on the slip transfer fee increase. And so the remainder, C through G, we can vote. You all can vote on. The 2% slip fee increase is insignificant, really, to the two slip holders who are here tonight, so they're not precluded from voting on the slip fee increase, but they would be precluded from voting on the slip transfer fee increase.
Thanks for reminding me. I was curious about C, but now I remember we've had a few past conversations about that, so thank you.
Yeah, and that's why my motion was to suggest all those last five, C through G. Thanks.
Okay. So we will start with C. All in favor? Jeanette, will you want to read it, and then we'll vote on it, please? C only.
C, recommend approval of a 2% slip fee increase for fiscal year 2016 and fiscal year 2017.
Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? Okay, it passes.
I'll need to get a second.
Oh, okay. Helene did that.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry if I go too fast. Jeanette, will you read D for us, please?
D, recommend approval of a $5 increase to the cost of annual waterfront parking permits.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays?
Nay.
Abstentions? Okay. You got that. Would you read E, please?
E, recommend approval of a 10-cent per foot increase in the visitor slip fee.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Nays? Abstentions? Passes. Would you please read F?
F, recommend the establishment of a Harbor Patrol vessel replacement fund.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Abstentions? Nays? Very good. And finally with G, please.
G, forward a recommendation to City Council for approval of the Waterfront Department's fiscal year 2016 and fiscal year 2017 budgets and incorporation into the city budget process.
And all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Nays or abstentions? Very good. Thank you. Last item, the final item, number 8, is the commercial fishing slip lottery.
Item 8, commercial fishing slip lottery 1R28. Recommendation that Harbor Commission conduct a lottery for the purpose of assigning a slip permit for berth 1R028 in Santa Barbara Harbor, a designated commercial fishing slip.
Mr. Cronman.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair and Commissioners, by way of background, in November of 2014, the Department terminated a slip permit at 1R28 in Santa Barbara Harbor for criminal behavior, illegal behavior. That termination was not appealed. No waiver was requested from the director, nor appeal from the Harbor Commission. And since no commercial fisherman, it was a designated commercial fishing slip, as the one you dealt with in January. Since no commercial fishermen remain on the department's master waiting list, the slip permit for 1R28 was designated for reassignment via a commercial fishing slip lottery, specifications and procedures for which are outlined in the municipal code. So notice of the commercial fishing lottery was advertised in newspapers and other information outlets from Monterey to San Diego, and a link was created on the Waterfront Department website, including all the documents that are attached to your report here tonight. And it was also posted on the marina gates, and request forms were available at the Harbor Master's office. We provided details of the lottery at the November 2014 and at January 2015 Harbor Commission meetings. So the department accepted commercial fishing lottery participation request forms, as they're called, from February 2nd of this year until March 5th of this year, and we received a total of 12 applicants or lottery participant requests during that period. So at this point, as we've done before, we would request that the chair randomly draw 3 forms for the purpose of assigning a slip for 1R28, a 60-foot slip in Santa Barbara Harbor. Staff will review the eligibility of the first-ranked lottery participant, then either assign the slip permit to that individual or move on to the second and third-ranked participants if necessary. So at this point, Mr. Chair, I would ask that you draw 3 names one at a time and read them and read the ticket number associated with the name so we can conclude this process.
Good. Commissioner Bantlin, will you load the golden cylinder, please? With the first pick in the 2015 Santa Barbara Harbor Commission Commercial Fisherman Slip Lottery goes to number 631461. That appears to be Mr. Sharp. Okay. Miss, sorry.
Ollie Sharp.
With the second pick, goes to number 631455. Good. And with the third pick, goes to number 631458.
Mr. Chair, do you have the names for numbers 2 and 3?
Yes. Number two is Morgan Casagnola, and number 3 is Tony Luna. And I have the tickets up here for Jeanette to take and to confirm.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for your duties again tonight on the lottery. I think that concludes our business on this item.
Very good.
Chair Spicer, are we supposed to do anything with this form?
I would ask Mr. Reedman.
I believe with this simplified, abbreviated lottery that we can do without.
There's a place for a signature and everything, so
official.
It just looks so official.
Well,
I sign that.
Go ahead and sign it, and we'll.
Mr. Reedman, any staff communications?
None from staff this evening.
Very good. Any final thoughts or comments from the commission?
Yes. As an attendee of the Sea Center's Gala on Stearns Wharf, from a participant standpoint, it was a beautiful event. It was well done. We found no parking issues. My hope is that the city waterfront staff did not have any serious issues either. But just as I said, from my standpoint, it seemed that the museum and the waterfront department collaborated pretty well because it came off flawlessly and was a lot of fun for participants. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, with that, I believe we are adjourned. Can I get a all in favor? Aye. Thank you very much, everybody.